Hello YouTube and welcome to Tale of Steel Armory. Today I'm gonna teach you how I made this a lenticular round shield. So as the base material for my shield I used some 6mm plywood Peddler, which I got from my local hardware store. I cut it into 6mm wide strips on this really nice little table saw, making sure not to cut off my fingers, because you know there's some safety features that are missing on this machine, on this particular one. Also off camera I already built this little jig, made from some leftover plywood. As you can see, it consists of a row of semicircles and has a diameter of about 70 centimeters. I started by just bending the material over and screwing it in place on both sides, just to check if the jig would work as I intended, just to realize that it didn't. So I had to sand off a lot of material from the jig with this little belt sander, which I borrowed from my father, just so this the radius of the pieces when I bent them would contact all of these little ribs, which was quite tricky. But after all that sanding it would contact at least I think 4 or 5 of the 7 ribs, which was good enough for me. So I just screwed on the second piece right next to the middle one, and as you can see there is a little overlap which has to be taken off. At this moment I really didn't know how much or what, I just eyeballed it, but I got quite sophisticated at it later. I'm gonna explain to you how I did this in a few seconds. On these pieces I just went on it with my belt grinder, checked if it fit, and went on it again if it didn't. I think I took off about 4mm from both sides, so 8mm on one side, which wasn't the right way, but I kept the pieces on because it worked. It just wasn't a problem. And after the first one was made to fit, I translated it over to the second one, just used it as a pattern, and that was the first 3 of the boards. I did the same for the 4th and 5th board and noticed that I had taken off way too much material and that my method isn't really going to be practical in the long term. So I just sat down and thought about how I could make this possible. I started by clamping down the piece on both sides with some screw clamps, and as you can see there's a little gap that forms when the pieces are laying in the right position. I measured how far this gap would be and translated it over to the sides. Then I went over to the workbench. I used these holdfasts as an anchor point, and another piece of material as a ruler. I tried aligning the edges so that they would be the starting point of the radius, and bent the ruler to the edge, so this would give me a really nice radius, which I then cut out with the jigsaw and used the belt grinder again to clean up the edges. And as you can see with this method, the pieces fit quite perfectly. I later started to sand them down at an angle so they would leave even less of a gap, but there's always room for improvement. And after a few more pieces I started to run into another problem. As you can see, I'm running out of material, and the cut-off pieces which I had left over, which I actually planned to use as the side pieces on the shield, they were just a bit too short, so I had to cut off some more material. I expected this, so I just bought a second board, but I should have planned out my cuts a bit better, because I wasted a lot of material. And with the 2 pieces I fucked up, that was way more than I expected. Now, since I wanted the shield to be thinner on the edges and a bit thicker in the middle, I just took off some of the screws and yeah, tried to thin it out first with a hand plane, an electrical one, which yeah was semi-optimal, and yeah, later with the bed grinder, which took a lot of time, and this whole thing really didn't work as I planned it. It was a lot of work. Been standing about an hour on the piece and only managed to thin it out on the edges, and not really, it wasn't the result I wanted, which resulted in the shield being way too heavy now. But since it's only a display piece and I'm not fighting with it, it's okay. It's sad, but it's okay. Here you can see my end result. It's getting quite thin on the edges, but not really thinned out anywhere else. At this point I just decided to leave it as is and take off a bit more on the next layer, which I did, but as I said, the shield is way too heavy now. Just a little side note, the whole construction process only on the shield body, without the jig, without covering it, without all the metal work, took over 12 hours of work. Just me making little planks, screwing them on, screwing them back off, taking something off, screwing them back on, making another row, sanding it down. A lot of repetitive work, so I just left it out in this cut. You know the drill. And here's some information from my editing room. I forgot to plug in my microphone. I've been recording about half an hour right now, and well, I just looked down and saw that there was a plug missing. And yeah, I've been recording with my little webcam microphone for the whole time, which unexpectedly doesn't sound that bad. So I'm just gonna keep on recording with it, because, well, why not? Now, another miscalculation on my part was that I ordered a full bucket of glue, 5 liters, which was not cheap, about 28 euros I think, and well, I only used about a liter of it maximum. And as you can see, I took off each plank individually, tried to cover it with as much glue as possible with this little paintbrush I stole from my last employer. And yeah, I just went over the whole thing, taking off each plank, covering it, screwing it back on, marking it with a pencil so I wouldn't screw it off back again, because I wasn't really working with a system here. And after I was finished with that, I just left it to dry over the weekend and started with the metalworking. I've decided to use the traditional coal forge this time, so I had to split some kindling, some firewood to light it up. I cheated a little bit because I used a modern barbecue lighter to light up my firewood stack. I let it burn down a little before I started stacking up some coke around it, which gave me a nice little forging fire. For the base material I used some 2mm sheet metal, just some basic mild steel, and I cut it out with my Makita electrical shears, which was, as you can see, a bit tricky because you have to bend the material out of the way to cut it, and with this thick of a material it takes quite a lot of force to do that. Not from the shear works perfectly, just to bend the material out of the way. I started by dishing the material with a 2 kilo rawhide mallet into this little dishing form I made a few years ago. It's quite handy. I made sure to only dish it shallow and do the rest in the hot form because I didn't want the material to rip. You could dish it out way more, but this is gonna thin the material down, so the end result is gonna be weaker, which I didn't want. Also, I wanted to test out a new technique. That new technique I wanted to try out was raising. It's a classical blacksmithing technique which was used way back in the high medieval times to raise out helmets and such, and sheet metal pieces in general, without thinning down the material, which is quite tricky, as I might add. I really didn't know a lot about the technique, and I still don't, but I've tried it at least. The end result was quite okay. The basic idea is you heat up one section at a time and try to push it inwards on your little anvil. You're hitting it a bit off-center, so you're not squishing the material in between the anvil and the hammer, thinning it out that way. Then you work yourself around, one section at a time, until you reach the bottom, where you try to squish the folds to make it flat again. You only do a few centimeters at a time to control it better. And yeah, you work yourself around a few times until you have the shape you want, keeping the thickness as it was before, or hopefully keeping it. It's really a lot harder than it looks, and I really didn't know what I was doing at the time. It more or less worked. I'm not really pleased with the end result. I did end up thinning it out a bit, and it didn't reach the depth I actually wanted. But still, this shape wouldn't be possible just by dishing, so I can't complain. It was the first try after all. Another quick note from the editing room. Editing these videos is no fun. I really hate it. It takes hours and I don't see any progress in it. I've already finished my project and now I have to do all of this just to make a little video out of this. But the reason I do it, or well, what keeps me motivated, is that I've seen my last video has really gone through the roof, much more than I expected actually. And this really boosts my motivation. So please, if you want to support me and see more of these videos, just leave a like or subscribe, and just leave a little comment what you would do better, how you've solved these problems, if you've made one of these shields or something like it, or just tell me something nice. I don't know. That's just what I wanted to say. Thanks for watching. After raising it out to a sizable depth, I started to stretch out and flatten the rim with the flat side of my hammer over the rounded off corner of my anvil, carefully working myself around. Then I realized that I did not work out the piece deep enough, so I still had to do some dishing. I started by pushing out the inside to achieve that step I wanted. I then proceeded to work the newly created edge of the boss on the horn of my anvil, just to push it out a bit more, which worked fine. I just had to do some light taps and be really careful not to destroy it. After that I also really carefully dished out the midsection a bit more. This is where I failed with the last piece, which got so stretched out in the middle that it formed a crack, which destroyed the piece, and I lost about 1.5 hours of forging. Once I was pleased with the rough shape, I put it into the fire one last time, trying to heat it up evenly and let it cool down slowly to take away some of the built-up stress and tension in the material. Once it's been cooled down to about 300 degrees, I started the planishing process. Planishing is another old-school armor making technique where I try to flatten the surface by repeatedly hitting it with light blows over an anvil which is roughly the shape of your workpiece. Since I did not possess a shield boss shaped anvil, I switched from surface to surface, working the inside with a round hammer on a flat surface and the outside with a flat hammer on a round surface. This also cold hardens the material a bit and makes it more brittle. You can also sand the surface with a sanding block or with a file to make the deep and high spots more visible. And after an hour of planishing, sanding, filing and grinding, I ended up with this. To make the rivets I cut off some 6mm round bar and heated it up in the gas forge. Once they were nice and hot, I just took them over to the anvil and squished their heads with a ball peen hammer. This normally took only 2 minutes. I finished them off on this piece of steel with a hole in it. Then I also made some nails, which I didn't end up using. Next I cut out the handle section out of a 3mm piece of sheet metal. I just hammered both ends into a taper, the tips into a round disc. Then I spread out the midsection of the handle to about 1mm, where I would later insert a piece of wood for the handle. I also ground down an old board on my bed grinder because I didn't have a lathe. I rotated it in a power drill and started first by grinding and then filing it down to the shape I wanted. And I sawed it off with a hacksaw. Then I drilled a hole into the center of the boss and drilled it on the little nub with a round-faced hammer. I also drilled 6 holes around the rim of the boss to later rivet it onto the shield. And 3 into the handpiece. The 4th one is gonna follow later because it has to fit to the boss. And with that I finished the metalworking section of this video. Now back at the woodworking station, I marked a circle around the middle and around the rim of the shield and cut it out with a jigsaw. The outside diameter ended up to be 68 centimeters, the inside about 13.5. I also again tried to thin down the material with the belt grinder. This again didn't really work so well and the shield was still way too heavy. After that I covered the whole thing in a thick layer of glue and started to stretch a sheet of linen over it. Of course I used way too much glue, so I had to spend the next hour just popping and cleaning the little glue bubbles that got pushed out of the cloth. Then I gave the whole thing a day to dry out and cut off the excess. I tried to mix up a nice tone of red because I just couldn't find any in my local hardware store, and I started painting it with 2 layers of this mixed up red color as the base, and then tried to add some yellow stripes to it. Of course, this was done. The red always started to shine through after it dried, so I had to cover it with about 6 to 8 layers of the yellow color, which was way too much work again. Now back to the forge. I drilled the holes for the rivets and also made some washers out of leftover pieces of 1mm sheet metal. Just punching a hole and cutting them out with my metal shears. And yeah, then I just riveted on the boss. For the handle piece I cut off a bit of 28mm pine dowel, which I actually wanted to use for my spear, but it was a bit too long, so I could sacrifice a few centimeters. Don't forget to check out that video right after this one. I'm gonna link it down in the description. It's really nice. I shaped a little piece of wood on my background and fitted it on. And now all that was left was just drilling a few hundred holes around the outside to stitch on the rawhide rim. I bought two rows of rawhide on eBay for way too much money again, and let them soak in water for a few hours to make them a bit softer. Then I just had to punch a double amount of holes into the rawhide with this little hole punch I use for leather, and quickly sew it on before it becomes too stiff to work with. And now, with this last step done, I went back to the forge and drilled out the rivets for the handle again. The problem was, with the handle facing into the boss, there wasn't enough room for my hand, which was quite uncomfortable. So I just turned it around, made some new rivets with a little riveting jig I made extra for that, and riveted it back on. And now, after about 40 hours of work and really a lot of mistakes which could have been avoided, the shield was finally finished. I'm not really pleased with the end result, even though it looks really quite good and it fits my kit quite nicely. It's still really heavy and a bit uncomfortable to hold. If you're now feeling inspired to make your own lenticular round shield, don't make the same mistakes that I did. And don't forget to let me know how it went in the comments. And if you got that far in the video and liked what I'm doing, don't forget to check out my channel. Especially my Gondor Fountain Guard helmet series was really a passion project for me. Stay patient and don't let some little setbacks stop you. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.